poet. And I am assuming that this is because of her academic reputation as a professor, as a critic, and as a very fine poet and fictionist. And she's a playwright. She has a play being produced in the Bay Area now. And there's some things I want to say before I tell you something about Sherley Williams that is very personal to me and personal to some of the people in the room. I'm very glad that you showed up tonight, all of you, and you stayed with us until they have arrived. But it is important to understand something. Not too many years ago, the literary establishment in American universities had decreed by their practice and gentlemen's agreement, that the world of poetry was the exclusive domain of males, and that these males, obviously white and formally educated. And I can remember as a fiction student in the University of Iowa's Writers' Workshop that in 1 year they brought no poets who were not male and who were not white, and that we protested, women and minority students, and that situation has been dramatically rectified. And so there has been some improvement. I think that's another reason we're talking about this highly accomplished poet tonight. Sherley Williams is a native Californian. She grew up in the San Joaquin Valley, and she began writing, she said, in college. She's a graduate of the California State University of Fresno. She holds an MA in English from Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. She is a former senior Fulbright lecturer at the University of Ghana. She has had visiting professorships, including tenures at the University of Southern California and Cornell University. She is the Williams Professor of Literature at the University of California, San Diego. It is said of her that she is noted for the bluesy quality of her poetry and her willingness to explore controversial issues, that she is also a leading literary critic. I want to just mention one of her works through this, and that she has often been cited for her pioneering theoretical studies of Afro-American literature. She was a feature poet at the recent Cool Jazz Festival, and it has been said of her, they talk about her, the striking and unusual, quote, musicality of her prose and poetry, an abiding fascination with Afro-American oral culture, and her enthusiasm for live readings. Sherley Williams is an Emmy Award winner for a television performance of her poetry. Her award-winning stories have been widely received and published by Essence, by Black Scholar, by the Iowa Review. She has been anthologized in collections of contemporary literature. Very recently, she was nominated for the National Book Award for the collection called the Peacock Poems. I hope she reads some of those tonight. She is also the author of a study of Afro-American literature called Give Birth to Brightness. What else? The play that is being produced now in the Bay Area by Sherley, I saw an article in the San Francisco Chronicle, is called Letters from a New England Negro, and I am told it's being highly received. She has a novel that is forthcoming from William Morrow, and it's called Dessa Rose, and it is described here as explores a tense relationship between a rebelling slave woman and a would-be white mistress, etc. I'd like to say a couple things. I'd like to read something from interviews with outstanding black writers. It's called Black Women Writers at Work, and this collection includes Maya Angelou, Toni Cade Bambara, Gwendolyn Brooks, among many, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, and Sherley Williams. And there's an interesting comment by Sherley in this collection. She is asked, does your work attempt to show the cohesion and meaning in life, by the interviewer? And Sherley Williams says, for me, writing is a process of ordering the world. It is a process of bringing insight, playing around with possibilities, solutions, in a way I could never play around with in actual life. And so I have read much of her work, and I'd like to suggest to you, as you will hear tonight, as displayed tonight, that her poetry explores the complexities and, if you will, mysteries of a very special consciousness and sensibility. And so I'd like you to welcome, if you can, Sherley Williams.
I really am pleased to read again at Fresno State. I spent a lot of time here, both as a student and as a teacher, and I consider that experience as fundamental to my development. I was privileged to have studied and done graduate work at one of the finest departments of literary study in the West, and I mean the English department here at Fresno State. They nurtured me when I needed it, and they also kicked me out of the nest when I needed that too. And coming back at this time gives me, an opportunity to kind of reflect on some of the aspects of having lived and grown up in Fresno. I tend to think of myself as a black woman writer, submerging, whatever regional identity I have under the more easily identifiable ones of race and gender. Now, I really make no secret of my Valley roots in my work, but much of what I feel about them has yet to be explicitly expressed in that work. I've used California in the prose poems that open my first book of poetry, the Peacock Poems, and I used it as a means of kind of rooting the persona in a realistic literary landscape. And I hope that in the poems that I read tonight about Fresno and the Valley, that you will recognize, some of the landscape and some of the experiences. See, this is a poem called, doesn't really have a name. I call it Fresno. I took the job in LA that summer. Every month I went back to Fresno to see the doctor. He teased me about going into labor in the Grapevine, that stretch of highway which winds from Tejon Pass to the Valley Floor. I know you know that's the Valley, too. Interstate 5 climbs steeply from the floor of the San Fernando Valley into the Tehachapi Mountains. The winds up there are treacherous, the curves and grades deceptive, and I'd almost hold my breath until that spot in the Grapevine, just before the highway makes its final curving descent to the valley. The world seems to be spread out before you. Oranges and lemon groves, peach and apricot orchards, grape and cotton fields. The land is onions and alfalfas, sweet melons and packing sheds. The oil derricks to the west aren't visible. Neither are the turkey farms and feedlots just over almost any horizon. But I know where they are. I had hated this, hated all the squat valley towns, had left, returned, left. The memory of the sun on the dirt and grass graves, on the shiny black skins of my family and friends, draws me back. I also used the physical location to suggest certain mythic relationships, and the geography thus became an occasion to begin an archetypal journey. We drove east that summer, just my son and me, catching Interstate 80 at the interchange near the Oakland-Berkeley limits where the highway skirts the bay. The first day we crossed the northern end of the valley and the Saharas, covered the desert between Reno and Salt Lake. By sunset, we were into the rolling, hilly country on the Utah-Wyoming line, trying to make it to the hotel at Little America before it got too late. As we topped each rise, I expected to see the lights of the motel complex on the horizon, but no lights were visible in the gathering dust. Interstate 80 plunges and rises, curves now northward, now south in that area, always holding stubbornly to an easterly direction. We passed very few cars, and on one of those rising curves, I glanced left to where California would be. The sun hadn't quite set. The western sky was a blaze of gold. Then the road curved northward, curved downward and east again, and we continued into the darkness. The fabled urban areas became a symbol of the city lights that most Americans have hankered after at one time or another, especially when they are young, as I was then, and in love, as I hope never to be again. I'm telling you, if you do not know what love will do for you, I hope you never, ever have to find out. It's called This City Light. Oh, I see myself as I was then, skinny little piece of woman, dying to get to Frisco and change. I couldn't see the worn patches on my coat, only the suede, and once late at night I climbed through a window into a room. It was bare. The pot up in smoke and the nigger was gone. I see myself as I was then, skinny little woman girl sitting in a third-floor room. A voice floats up from the street calling me to prayer, and once in answer I went to the door. There was an old woman there crying, "Bell, bell, bell." I wet myself and falling up the stairs. He asked once to tease what I did just for fun. You don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't fuck, was the way it was phrased, and the words, "No, I don't fuck unless it's with you," never got said, and I passed it all off as one more hip joke. Oh, I could say more. There was the day we crossed the bridge. We were perched on the back of the truck. I never saw the bay quite like that again. Oakland, a dream city I was leaving behind. Frisco, a city of dreams I wanted to make mine. But these three things would still stay the same. I came to the city to live on a hill. I am the bird that was plucked. I am the woman that was. So what follows is an installment on a performance piece that I do a little of at each reading. Its working title ought to be something like To Make a Poet Black and Californian. Other installments might include Authenticating Voice, which asks the questions, can a vernacular poet find happiness as a professor of literature at a major research university? And the California Image and the Eastern Mystique, which begs the question raised in the former. I don't claim any special provenance in speaking as a California artist. I think one of the ways that California and the West inform and reform the American vision is in its plurality, the multiplicity of voices and visions that have arisen to tell their tales, that find forums in places like this, platforms from which they may speak to a wider constituency. I think that in being true to one, we can be true to all, reflecting and reaffirming basic tenets of American life. This is a poem called Witness. Based on some fleeting moments of malitis, nigger knowledge of the white man and black life, I give voice to the old stories. This is not romance, private fiction spun from scattered reading in public documents, bastard logic nor Sambo's tricking. This is a metaphor, liable, like Harlem, to be dismissed in liberal anthologies with a changeling footnote that underreads the poems, brands the footnoter racist, his every statement the product of some evil intent. Witness, a Negro section in the shared past. I was drawn to writing because I wanted to talk specifically about the experiences of workaday black people, to celebrate a certain mode of being in the world that still seems to me little short of miraculous. Yet, as a Californian, and one from a city that is suburban rather than urban, where blacks are no more than 10% of the population, and I learned the other day that really it comes closer to about 5 or 6%. As a Californian coming from that kind of background, I have been raised away from the mainstreams, which are the rural South and the urban North, of the national black experience. I have emphasized my relationship to the national black community, drawing upon the collective themes of that experience for what I take to be my most important work. But I'm also one of a surprisingly large number of people who were actually born in California, and that too has marked my work. These are two poems from my first collection. The first is called Cano. And I don't even know if this is actually a town. I know it's a little place someplace out here. You see the signs on the road sometimes. I think it's near Reedley or Sanger or someplace like that. But at one point in my life, we lived there. And this poem is a kind of fragment of a memory of that time. It be cold, 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 and the wind, Lord, the wind, it sweep that sky blue. The field fire send up a gray trail to the hazy sky. Daddy and Bill speak in smoky whispers. Don't get too close by the fire. Watch that baby, Ruiz. I move way. This side warm, other side cold. Both sides can't get warm at once. Ain't no grapes on the vines. I know when it be warm, tray grapes turn brown, crumple in the sun. They juice be sweet and dusty. The sand burn your feet, grit in your mouth, on your skin. The rows of black vines stretch far as I can see. There one, I cry. Bill fetched the gun to his shoulder and bam, the gopher dead. How many you make that? Greens, Daddy spit. A little streak of lean, streak of fat. It be cold, cold, cold. Wind sweep the sky blue. The day be gold. And this one is called The Trimming of the Feathers. I wish I could still stay down by the fire at the end of the row and just watch the baby, but Daddy say I'm a big girl now. Not big enough to have my own sack, just only to help pile the cotton in the middle of the row for Mama to put it in hern. I got to keep my jacket buttoned. It's cold. Mama say I move more faster, I wouldn't be feeling it so much. I can't do what her and Daddy do. Move fast, move slow and fast together and get a bunch of cotton and keep warm and watch the baby learn. Maybe I get old as Jess Marie, even Ruiz. I can do 100 pounds a day, hold the baby, but she won't need no holding by then. Mama sing, Daddy hum. He picking the roadside Ruiz and Jess Marie, and they pick inside of us. We come early for it's even light, and Mama face be so dark under them white head rags, and by the end of the day, they be dirty with sweat. It be getting on tonight then. Us all be tired. I be thinking about the beans Mama cook. Jack come with the bus, Daddy take the baby, and Mama drag the sack. I grew up in Fresno at a time when blacks in the Central Valley were both segregated from the white community and isolated from the other larger black communities by distance and terrain. As far as I knew, there were no black writers or artists, engineers, civil servants anywhere in the country, or even sales clerks downtown. I was in the 5th grade before I discovered that blacks could really teach in school. When a black doctor came to town a year or so later, my friends and I were convinced that he was an African because no Negroes had hands that smooth and clean. Once a week on Sunday afternoons, we listened to rhythm and blues on the radio. The Orioles, Ray Charles, Ruth Brown, Sam Cooke, remember any of these? Earl Bostic, James Brown, the Flamingos, Etta James, B.B. King, Frankie Lyman. Those 2 hours on Sunday afternoons were our only connections with the national black community in a town where there was no black newspaper that was most often bypassed by traveling black shows or reviews, where few black movies ever played. One of my earliest memories is of my father speeding through darkness and rain, taking us to see stormy weather because the movie was too rare and too good to miss. I have written of growing up with that sense of cultural isolation in poems I call the iconography of childhood. And this first poem actually doesn't have a title. It's just number 2 in the series. These are tales told in darkness, in the quiet at the ends of the day's heat, surprised in the shadowed rooms of houses, drowsing in the evening sun. In this one, there is music and 3 women. Some child is messing with the Victrola. Before Miss Irma can speak, Ray Charles does, of the nighttime. And all it is the fabled music, y'all. Seldom given airplay in those valley towns, heard mostly in the juke joints we'd been told about. And so longed for in those first years in the valley, it had come to seem almost illicit to us. But the women pay us no mind. We settle in the wonder of the music and their softly lit faces, listening at the songs of our groans. And I wrote of it again in a poem called A Record for My Friends. I have lived without music except what I could play in my head. Oh, radio defended me, the happy heralds of the ghetto, souling in a grubby war with silence and sails, the mean substitute for song. It's about someone saying what the next thing will be, and speech reach for it, and we do. Driven on gypsy chords to root the word now fluid, well, no. The mind is not music. Get what you love by heart. Play this for your friends. Years later, when I came back to teach at Fresno State in 1972, many of my composition students from the Valley would write in their journals of listening to Happy Harold's House of Blues on Sunday afternoons, thus reminding me how technology has bound America and the world together, given us a collective experience where none was possible before. The program was for those students, as it had been for me, a link with the world beyond the mountains, both an expression of a self we barely understood and could hardly articulate, and an affirmation. And so I recreated in what I would now call a California girlhood, were I to rename the iconography, a regional as well as ethnic experience. This is the first poem in that series. And it goes back to the time. Remember, I keep looking at your faces and you all look incredibly young. So I'm hoping there's somebody out there that remembers. I know Peter does and Phil does and Freddie does. When there was a building restriction, remember, you couldn't build a building in this part of California over 11 stories tall. So you had all these towns with buildings no higher than 10 stories. And Fresno was one of those. A town less than 10 stories tall. Spring rains wash the wind. Light annihilates distance. Snow-flecked sierras loom at land's end. Land flat as hoe cake. Summers hot enough to fry one. Crops fanned out in fields far as eyes can see. Every time we work a row, another appears on the horizon. And this one. The buildings of the projects were arrayed like barracks in uniform rows we called regulations ugly. The world in less than 1 square block. What dreams our people had dreamed there seemed to us just like the valley, so much heat and dust. Home training was measured by the day's light and scolds and ironing cords. We slipped away from chores and errands, from orders to stay in call, to tarry in the streets. Gonna learn what down home didn't teach. And sundown didn't hold us long. Yet even then, some grown-up sat still and shadowed, waiting for us as the sky above the valley dimmed. And this one, called the green-eyed monsters of the valley dusk. Sunset knocks the edge from the day's heat, filling the valley with shadows. Time for coming in, getting on, lapping fields, lapping orchards like greyhounds, racing darkness to mountain rims, land's last meeting with still lighted sky. This is a car I watched in childhood, streaking the straightaway through the dusk. I looked for the ghost of that girl in the midsummer fields whipping past, but what ghosts lurk in this silence are feelings, not spirits, not sounds. Bulbous lights approach in the gloom, hovering briefly between memory and fear, dissolve into fog lights mounted high on the ungainly bodies of reaping machines. Time coming in, time getting on. Still, there are parts of that girlhood that I think of as uniquely my own, reaching as they do toward that larger racial community of which I am also a part. This one is called Summer Mornings. Summer mornings, we rose early to go and rob the trees, bringing home the blossoms we were told were like a white girl's skin. And we believed this as though we'd never seen a white girl except in movies and magazines. We handled the flowers roughly, sticking them in oily braids or behind dirty ears, laughing as we preened ourselves, savoring the brown of the magnolias aging as though our color had rubbed off on the petals' creamy flesh, transforming some white girl's face into ornaments for our rough, unruly heads. Maybe some of you will remember the Wishon line. It's a bus line that went from Wishon, the Wishon district here, all these beautiful homes arrayed before you. And it went from there over to Huntington Park, again with all of these beautiful homes arrayed before one. The end of the Huntington Park line is also I don't know if they're still there, but when I grew up here, there are all of these county buildings, the county hospital, county welfare, and as I say in the poem, county home. The end of the line is movement, the process of getting on, getting off, of moving right along. The dank corridors of the hospitals swallowed him up, moving right along now from distant sanatorium to a local healthcare unit. The end of that line is song. TB is killing me. We traveled some to see Daddy on that old Wishon route, but the dusty graves swallowed him up. These are the buses of the century running through the old wealth of the town. Huntington Park, Van Ness Extension, the way stops of servants, rest after miles of walking and working cotton, working grapes, working hay. The end of this line is the county. County hospital, county welfare, county home. Moving right on. No one died of TB in the 50s. No one rides that line for free. It was not my ambition to become a writer, though I read voraciously as a child, not the classics of the quote-unquote average white childhood, though one imaginative and caring teacher introduced our fourth grade class to Wind in the Willows and Charlotte's Web. But True Confessions and Our Story and the historical fiction of Frank G. Slaughter, Thomas B. Costain, and Frank Yerby, whom I didn't know at that time was black. Black characters figured in Yerby's fiction as they did in most fiction of the time, as servants and slaves. And though I understood that domestic service or field work was destined to be my place in life, I was not interested in reading about them. I wanted, even as a 10-year-old, to read about romance and adventure, despite the fact that it was unlikely that I would ever know either. This is called Number 6. Show fare cost a lot, but we ran the movies every chance we got, mostly grade B musicals that became the language of our dreams. Baby Lois sang in the rain for the hell of it. Helen was a vamp. Ruiz was the blood-red rose of Texas, her skin as smooth and dark as a bud with just a hint of red. Sweating and slightly shamefaced, we danced our own routines, seeing our futures in gestures from some half-remembered films. We danced crystal sidewalks, thrilled in the arms of neighborhood boys, and beheld ourselves as we could be beyond the projects, the 9 and 10-year-old stars of stage and screen and black men's hearts. So I entered adolescence and was moved to seek out writings by blacks, not so much as models for my own work. I had no work then, but to see what other black people had made of the trauma that life seemed to me. I was too embarrassed to ask teachers or librarians for books on what we have since come to call the black experience, for what if there were none, and too shy to reveal my own adolescent agony. So I wandered around the shelves of our small high school library, surreptitiously looking for any title that might be about black people. Thus, I discovered Richard Wright's autobiography, Black Boy, and the autobiographies of black women entertainers, Ethel Waters and Eartha Kitt. I learned from these books that it was possible to survive. I already knew one could endure. My mother had taught me this. These books taught me, almost against my will, that it was possible to dream. Well, you know how it is with dreams. One leads to another, and the next thing you know, you're trying to write, troubling the past and shaking the future. This is a poem called California Light. The freeway is a river of light, rounding the base of Mount Soledad, its distant drone a part of the night. I've watched in the darkness as the river dimmed to the fitful passing of solitary cars and heard the coyotes in the canyon crying their survival to the strange land. I booted up one day, walked out across the mesa that fronts along my place till the land was a shallow cup around me and the houses were lost in the distance on its rim. The plants were the only life I saw. Muted greens, dry browns, bursts of purple and lighter blues, brilliant in the spring light. Something rustled the undergrowth, a jet murmured in the softly clabbered sky. The Indian dead are here, buried beneath Spanish place names and the cities of the pioneers, and the droning silence is witness to what each has claimed, what each owned. My father's grave is here somewhere, his tail lost like that jet at Clabber, his children scattered along the river, voices singing to the night. I think being a Californian gives me a special license to switch dictions, to improvise rhythm and rhyme schemes, to flatten and deflate accepted assumptions. California is, after all, California, eclectic and unconventional. And precisely because there are so few rules, I think working in California demands a tremendous discipline that is nonetheless real for all that it is almost invisible. Consider, as one Southern California bumper sticker has finally proclaimed, another shitty day in paradise. Or a Californian crying the blues. I can find it. It's called A Young Woman's Blues. I wrote a lot of blues when I was a young woman, but now that I'm older, I find that I don't need to do so often. I tell a dude in a minute, better get your business straight before coming to talk that talk to me, because the cat got to be together with his own self before he tried to get it together with me. But even with your stuff this shaky, I'd want to be 40 if it meant you'd talk your talk with me. Ain't nobody can be raised twice, and that took me a while to learn. I only got one child, that's my son, and I got enough to do trying to get him and me through the world. But you're a man, and it's been some time since I thought of myself as a girl, so 40 would be just another number if me being however much older would let you get down, would help us deal in some, well, righteous love. I'd like to read this one last poem, and then I want to read you a bit of my forthcoming novel. And I hope by reading the novel that you will be so astounded that you will wait with bated breath for July when it is to appear. And then you will rush to your local bookseller and demand that they get it in. This is called the Peacock Song, and for a long time I thought of it as like my signature song, and I don't know whether I should read it now or after I've read from the novel, but I'll put it here anyway. They don't like to see you with your tail dragging low, so I try to hold mine up high. No one wants to know where you're going till after you've been, and even though I told them, ain't nobody heard. How a peacock gonna speak? I got no tongue. Here I come with my pigeon-toed strut, and my head is up for balance, and so they can look in my eye. See that sty? That was from begging. That callous come from brushing against all the someones I met on my way to Ben. Or is it am? I never do know. But I was trying to make them feel that I need a little heart rubbing, soul scrubbing. This is real. But if I'm a peacock, my feathers supposed to cover all hurts. And if you want to stay one, then you got to keep that tail from dragging. So mine's is always held up sky high. My novel is a historical novel. It's about a young black woman who is a slave, who is being transported on a coffle. A group of slaves herded from one place to another, walked from one place to another. And she participates in an uprising on the coffle, which is eventually put down. And she, as one of the ringleaders of the rebellion, is sentenced to be hanged. But she's pregnant, so they want to wait until after the birth of her baby, and then they will hang her and sell the child into slavery. Well, lo and behold, since my story, you know, it is based on a real incident, and in the historical incident, she's, of course, put to death, and the child, as I say, is sold into slavery. In my story, while they are waiting to execute her, some of her comrades come back and rescue her. So she is taken to an isolated farmhouse owned by a white woman who, to all intents and purposes, has been abandoned by her husband. And we all know that genteel white women are so fragile and tender that if anything like this happens to them, they immediately go out of their minds because they are unable to stand up to the real world. Right, so these two, and that really becomes like the crux of the story. How, in fact, can these two women, in a kind of understatement, who are from two very different backgrounds, can they find, you know, some mutual respect, some basis for mutual respect, because it becomes very clear to both of them early on that they really need each other if each of them is not to be had by a very unyielding fate. And the scene that I want to read to you is when the former slave woman, Dessa, when she wakes up in this white woman's bed. Now, you have to realize that as a slave, and as a slave on a large plantation, she has had very little contact with white people, and none of her adventures, none of the things that have happened to her since since participating in this uprising, have given her any reason whatsoever to trust white people, let alone to trust white women. She wakes up in this white woman's bed, and she looks over and she sees this white woman nursing her baby. And this, too, is against everything that she has ever heard about or thought about in all of her 18 or 19 years. She is thoroughly flabbergasted. And it serves, rather than to make her more open to the white woman, really it serves to make her hate and to distrust her all the more. So this is coming right out of the dead center of the book. The days drifted by. Dessa slept, waking to the colored woman's gruff urgings to eat, the taste of some strongly flavored broth, the mealy texture of cereal, thinned, she thought, with milk, the changing of the bloody cloth. Acutely embarrassed and weak as a kitten, she bore the woman's gentle touch. Often she woke to find the baby asleep in the curve of her arm, and, hand heavy, powerless to caress him, she pursed her lips and breathed him love, or opened her eyes to some smiling face, dark, peach-colored, hair like night or the sun, whose name she ought to know. She would grin feebly. They would pat her arm. Nathan, she would think. Cully, but already they were gone. The colored woman chatted in a companionable way as she tended Dessa. Not enough to require an answer or force Dessa to questions, but she did listen, her mind holding enough to know the baby was doing well, the white woman meant no harm. She could sleep. She did not dream, but she became cautious in her waking. The white woman seemed often in the room, and Dessa woke now and then to find her settled in the rocker, hands quiet in her lap, dreamy-eyed, looking toward Dessa, but apparently talking to herself. Bonnet, Dessa heard several times. Half listening, fascinated, she watched the red mouth move. She knew she could understand what the white woman said if she would let herself, but if she understood the white woman, she would have to do something, and picnic, the white woman said. Dessa wanted to laugh. Where did you go to pick nits? Or was that something else only white folks did? She peered at the white woman. Her dress looked neat enough. So they had bugs, just like some trashy buckra, freshwater Negro who didn't know enough to keep clean. Mammy. That made no sense. Mammy's name came up often. What could this white woman know of Mammy, or Mammy of dropped waist and Dutch sleeves, unless these were cows? Once she woke in arms, her face tangled in a skein of fine webbing that seemed alive. It clung and itched her skin so bad. She almost suffocated in her terror, for she knew the white woman held her, and they were together in the big feather bed. And really, it was the white woman's breathing that saved her, brought her to her senses, its calm regularity imposing order on her own wildly beating heart. That breathing, punctuated by a drawn-out sigh of utter satisfaction and the small, fragile bundle that nestled at her spine. Turning cautiously, moving with infinite patience, she inched herself and the baby toward the edge of the bed. Squirming carefully into the soft mattress, she managed to nudge out a slight rise between herself and the other woman who, still breathing regularly, had likewise turned away. What kind of place had she come to, she thought, as her heart thudded against her ribs. Her fingers touched briefly the satiny hair, the thin velvet of her baby's skin. It was a long time before she slept. The colored woman's name was Ada, Dessa realized one morning. The long windows had begun to gray with dawn light. No conch or bell sounded here. People must get up with the rooster's crow. This was the Sutton place, except Master Sutton wasn't here. Ada called the white woman Ms. Ruin. There was something funny about the way Ada said the name, as though, was the white woman crazy? Dessa sweated. The thin stuff of her shift clung to her. Shift. Dessa clutched at the garment. She had never in her life owned cloth as fine as the material her hand rubbed against her side. She moved uneasily between the unbelievable smoothness of the sheet. The white woman's breathing was barely audible in the stillness. Maybe she was crazy, Dessa thought, but not a killer. No, not a killer. Nathan and Cully would not have brought her here. Not a killer, but touched, maybe. Strange in the head. What else could explain her own presence in this bed? Touched. And Ada said, Miss Ruint said, the master was coming home this harvest for sure. The other woman had laughed quietly. Ada said the white woman had said the same thing about the master's return last year, and he hadn't come. Dessa remembered that. Ada had rolled her eyes as if to say, Dessa couldn't quite put her finger on it. Crazy, maybe, she assured herself now, but not no killer. Ada spoke also of Dorcas. In her mind's eye, Dessa saw a thin, loam-colored face surmounted by a tangle of even darker hair. No, that was Annabelle, Ada's daughter, seldom seen and then only briefly, a slender figure who hummed quietly and showed no interest in Dessa. Dorcas was someone Ada quoted, someone Dessa didn't think she had yet seen. Never mind, she told herself. Her hand moved to soothe the baby. There had to be someplace else to sleep. She would ask Ada. Neither Ada nor her daughter belonged to the white woman. None of them did. Ada's words plucked at Dessa's attention. Ada's face beneath her bandana was placid, and Dessa wondered if she had heard right. Free? Dessa wondered silently as she watched Ada stir the bowl of grits. Dessa tried to gesture, but her hand fell limply to her side. She swallowed. Y'all, she croaked. Ada paused with a spoon halfway to Dessa's mouth. Free? She said, smiling, brown eyes looking closely at Dessa as she replaced the spoon in the bowl untouched. Cat, let loose your tongue, huh? Come on, it just a bit more. She stirred the remaining grits and lifted another spoonful toward Dessa. Come on, eat up. Dessa opened her mouth obediently. The grits had been thinned with milk and seasoned with butter, and Dessa held a spoonful in her mouth, savoring the richness. I wouldn't exactly call it free, Ada said doubtfully. We runned away, she added brightly, as though this explained it all. She let us stay here. She need the help. Man gone, slaves runned off. Ada shrugged and smiled. White folks think we hers, but ain't none of us never belonged to this place. She spooned the last of the cereal into Dessa's mouth and rose. Ada, Dessa managed to grasp a fold of the woman's skirt. Ada, sleep with you? She struggled to one elbow, then fell back weakly, her eyes seeking to hold the other woman's. Me and the baby? She couldn't spend another night in the white woman's bed. Honey? Ada bent over her, eyes warm with concern. Honey, me and Annabelle sleeps in that little lean-to they calls the kitchen. It just barely big enough for us, and it ain't no wise fitting. You ain't even out of child bed. Quarters we could, worse than a chicken run. Ada sat on the bed, stroking Dessa's hand. Tell you, honey, these some po' white peoples. Oh, this room and the parlor fine enough, but you know what's outside that door? A great big stairway lead right up to nothing, 'cause they never did finish the second floor. She laughed. The quarters is a cabin, one side for the women's, one side for the men's. Size, she added, when Dessa would have protested further. She the only nursing woman on the place. Even if you go, you ought to leave the baby here. Dessa had suspected from the way the baby turned from her, fretting and in tears, that she had no milk to speak of. Her baby nursing? Her breathing quickened and her heart seemed to pound in her ears. There was more, but Dessa turned away. Ada talked as much to herself as she did to Dessa, almost in the same way that the white woman did, never really expecting an answer. Already she seemed to have forgotten that Dessa had spoken. Dessa surrendered to the familiar lassitude. Runaways, Ada, Harker, how many others? And the white woman let them stay. Nurse, Dessa knew the white woman nursed her baby. She had seen her do it. It went against everything she had been taught to think about white women, but to inspect that fact too closely was almost to deny her own existence. That the white woman had let them stay, even that was almost too big to think about. Sometimes it seemed to Dessa that she was drowning in milky skin, ensnared by red hair. There was a small mole on the white woman's forehead just above one sandy eyebrow. She smelled faintly of some scent that Dessa couldn't place. Why had they all run here? Because she let them stay. Why had she let them stay behind? She was that put out about it, too. The white woman was sewing this time, setting big, careless stitches in a white cloth draped over her knees. Against her will, Dessa listened. Night of the St. Cecilia dinner, and of course, Mammy had to dress Mother for that. No white woman like this had ever figured in Mammy's conversations, Dessa thought drowsily. And this would have been something to talk about, too. Dinners and gowns, not just plain dresses. all by myself, and scared too. The Winstons was related to royalty, or maybe it was only just a night. The white woman paused a moment. Now, often as Daphne told it, you'd think I'd know it by heart. She shook her head and laughed softly. Mammy would know. Maybe, Dessa thought with a sudden pang. Mammy hadn't known about Cain, about Master selling Jeter. Mammy doubted that when it all happened so long ago, wasn't no one alive now who witnessed it. I seen it, Dessa started to say. Master sold Jeter to the trader, same as Mistress sold me. But the white woman continued without a pause. The pretty clothes? Well, I know Mammy didn't know a thing about history, but I knew she was right about the clothes. She used to dress me so pretty. Even the Reynolds girls, and they daddy owned the bank, everyone said they wore drawers made out of French silk. They used to admire my clothes. Dessa stared at the white woman. She was crazy, making up this whole thing, like pretend their clothes came from a fashionable modiste, but I always said, oh, this is a little something Mammy ran up for me. So when I walked into the Great Hall at Winston, I had on a dress that Mammy made, and it was Mammy's. Wasn't no Mammy to it. The words burst from Dessa. She knew even as she said it what the white woman meant. Mammy was a servant, a slave, Dorcas, who had nursed the white woman as Carrie had nursed young Mistress's baby before it died. But goaded by the white woman's open-mouthed stare, she continued, Mammy ain't made you nothing. Why, the white woman stopped, confused. Hurt seemed to spread like a red stain across her face. Seeing it, Dessa lashed out again. You don't even know Mammy. I do so, the white woman said indignantly. Papa give her. Mammy live on the Bonham plantation near Simeon on the Beaufort River, McAllen County. This was what they were taught to say if some white person asked them their name and what place they belonged to. The white woman gaped, like a fish, Dessa thought contemptuously, just like a fish out of water. Anybody could make this white woman's wits go gathering. My Mammy, the white woman sputtered. The words exploded inside Dessa. Your Mammy? Never had that white baby taken Jessup's place with Carrie. Your Mammy? No white girl could ever have taken her place in Mammy's bosom. No one. You ain't got no Mammy, she snapped. I do. I did so. The white woman was shouting now. The white cloth crushed in her trembling hands. All you know about is this kind of sleeve and that kind of bonnet, some party here. Didn't you have no peoples where you live? Mammy ain't nobody's name, not the real one. Ma'am, the white woman's baby started to cry, and the white woman made as if to rise and go to it. Dessa's voice overrode the tearful wail, seeming to pin the white woman in the chair. See, you don't even know Mammy's name. Mammy have a name, have children. She didn't. The white woman, finger stabbing toward her own heart, finally rose. She just had me. I was like her child. What was her name then, Dessa taunted. Child don't even know its own Mammy's name. What was Mammy's name? What? Mammy, the white woman yelled. That was her name. Her name was Rose, Dessa shouted back, struggling to sit up. That's a flower so red it looked black. When Mammy was a girl, they named her that count of her skin, smooth black, and they teased her about her breath 'cause she worked around the dairy, said it smelled like cow milk and her mouth was slick as butter, her kiss tangy as clabber. You are lying, the white woman said coldly. She was shaking with fury. Liar, she hissed. Dessa heaved herself to her knees, flinging her words in the white woman's face. Mammy gave birth to 10 children that come in the world living. She counted them off on her fingers. The first one rose after herself. The second one died before the white folks named it. Mammy called her Minta after a cousin she met once. Seth was the first child lived to go into the fields. Little Rose died while Mammy was carrying Amos, carried off by the diphtheria. Thank God he spared Seth. Remembering the names now the way Mammy used to tell them, lest they forget, she would say, lest her poor lost children die to living memory as they had in her world. Amos lived for a week one Easter. Seemed like he blighted the womb. Not another one lived till she had Bess. Mammy, telling the names until speech became too painful. Them was the two she left, Seth and Bess. Seth was sold away when she come with old mistress to the Reeves place. Sold away like Jeter, whose real name was Samuel, after us daddy. Only Carrie kept saying Jeter when she meant Junior, and that was the name he kept. Bess, born 2 years before old mistress married old Master Reeves, left because she was sickly, died before Rose reached her new home. Even buried under years of silence, Dessa could not forget. She had started on the names of the dead before she realized that the white woman had gone. Both children were crying now, but Dessa's voice continued through their noise. Jeffrey died the first year she come to the Reeves plantation. Caesar, 2 years older than Carrie, head kicked in by a horse he was holding for some guest. Carrie was the first child born at the new place to live. Dessa Rose, the baby girl. Anger spent now. She wept. Oh, I pray God Mammy still got Carrie Mae left. Thank you.
You're not clapping for me, right? I think Charles Hensler's check would not forgive me if I did not say that we were supposed to break for 10 or 15 minutes. Is that right? And then come back to class, and those of you who are interested in raising questions to this very fine poet. So 10 or 15 minutes.